The wind howled its mournful song through the broken windows of Blackwood Asylum, a desolate symphony echoing the forgotten cries of those once confined within its decaying walls. For decades, the towering stone structure, perched precariously on a lonely hill overlooking a perpetually gray sea, has stood as a monument to human suffering, a silent sentinel guarding secrets whispered only by the sea spray and the rustling leaves of ancient, gnarled trees. But beneath the peeling paint and crumbling plaster, beyond the rusted iron gates and the overgrown paths, lies a truth far more chilling than any ghost story. It's a truth woven into the very fabric of Blackwood, a narrative of despair, a final patient, and an entity that, some say, never truly left. This is a story not about the quick jump scare, but about the insidious dread that lingers, the kind that burrows deep into your psyche and refuses to let go. If you find yourself drawn to the mysteries that defy explanation, to the shadows that dance at the edge of human understanding, then you are in the right place. Consider subscribing to Far Beyond Terror, and join us as we delve into the horrifying truth of Blackwood Asylum. Blackwood Asylum, originally known as St. Jude's Sanatorium, opened its doors in 1888. It was heralded as a beacon of progressive psychiatric care, a place where the mentally infirm could find solace and, hopefully, recovery. The Victorian era, with its burgeoning understanding of mental health, saw the construction of numerous such institutions, often in remote locations, away from the clamor of urban life. St. Jude's was no exception. Its isolated position was intended to provide a tranquil environment conducive to healing, a sanctuary from the perceived stresses of modern society. However, the initial promise of St. Jude's quickly began to unravel. The sheer volume of patients, coupled with limited resources and the primitive medical knowledge of the time, transformed the sanatorium from a haven into a holding pen. Early records, meticulously kept in leather-bound ledgers now housed in a dusty archive, paint a grim picture. Treatments were rudimentary, often involving hydrotherapy, electroshock therapy, and various forms of sedation. Lobotomies, though not widely practiced until the mid-20th century, were rumored to have been performed in a clandestine manner in the asylum's later years, adding another layer of horror to its already dark history. The name change from St. Jude's Sanatorium to Blackwood Asylum occurred in 1923, a rebranding effort intended to shed the institution's tarnished reputation. By this point, local folklore had already begun to circulate, tales of strange occurrences within its walls, of patients whispering to unseen figures, and of a pervasive sense of dread that clung to the very air around the building. The new name, Blackwood, seemed to reflect this growing darkness, a tacit acknowledgement of the shadows that had gathered there. Despite the name change, the fundamental issues remained. Overcrowding continued to be a persistent problem, and the staff, often overworked and underpaid, struggled to cope with the increasingly complex needs of their patients. The asylum became a repository for society's unwanted, a place where those deemed incurable or inconvenient were simply forgotten. Families, ashamed of their afflicted relatives, would often sign them away, never to visit again, leaving them to languish within Blackwood's grim embrace. One particular case, however, stands out from the countless others, a story that intertwines with the very essence of Blackwood Asylum's enduring mystery, the case of Elara Vance. Elara was admitted to Blackwood on October 17, 1957, at the age of 24. Her admission record, a stark, typewritten document, states, "Severe melancholia and delusional paranoia." Elara came from a respectable, if somewhat reclusive family, in a small coastal town not far from the asylum. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Vance, were pillars of their community, known for their quiet piety and unwavering dedication to their daughter. However, their daughter's sudden decline into mental illness had cast a long shadow over their lives. According to the intake notes, Elara had begun to exhibit increasingly erratic behavior in the months leading up to her admission. She would speak of unseen presences, of whispers in the walls, and of a pervasive cold that seemed to follow her wherever she went. She claimed to see shadowy figures at the periphery of her vision, figures that would vanish the moment she tried to focus on them. Her parents, initially dismissive, grew increasingly concerned as Elara's condition worsened. She stopped eating, became withdrawn, and her once vibrant eyes took on a haunted, distant quality. The doctors at Blackwood, accustomed to such symptoms, prescribed a regimen of sedatives and occupational therapy. Elara was placed in Ward C, a section of the asylum reserved for patients deemed less responsive to traditional treatments. Ward C was notorious for its oppressive atmosphere. Its windows were barred, its walls a perpetual shade of institutional gray, and the air within it was always heavy with the faint, cloying scent of disinfectant and despair. Elara, however, proved to be an unusual case. While many patients would eventually succumb to the sedative effects of their medication, becoming docile and compliant, Elara's paranoia seemed to intensify. She would often be found huddled in a corner of her room, muttering to herself, her gaze fixed on an empty spot on the wall as if in conversation with an invisible interlocutor. Her nurses reported strange occurrences around her, objects moving on their own, inexplicable cold spots, and faint, disembodied whispers that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the building itself. These reports, initially dismissed as the product of overworked imaginations or the peculiar acoustics of the old asylum, began to accumulate, forming a disturbing pattern. Dr. Alistair Finch, a young, ambitious psychiatrist who had recently joined Blackwood's staff, took a particular interest in Elara's case. Dr. Finch, unlike many of his older colleagues, harbored a more open-minded approach to mental illness, sometimes even considering the possibility of external factors beyond purely physiological or psychological ones. He was known for his empathetic demeanor and his willingness to spend extra time with patients, truly listening to their fragmented narratives. He saw in Elara not just a diagnosis, but a person trapped in a terrifying reality. Dr. Finch reviewed Elara's file meticulously, noting the consistent reports of her delusions and the unusual phenomena reported by the staff. He observed her during therapy sessions, trying to establish a rapport, to understand the world through her eyes. What he found was not the incoherent rambling of a severely disturbed mind, but a chillingly consistent narrative. Elara spoke of an entity, a shadow that clung to her, a presence that had followed her from her home to the asylum. She described it as a cold, oppressive weight, a constant observer that fed on her fear and despair. She called it the Watcher. Dr. Finch, initially skeptical, began to document these occurrences with a scientific rigor that was unusual for the time and place. He meticulously recorded the dates, times, and descriptions of the strange events reported by nurses and orderlies in Elara's vicinity. He noted the sudden drops in temperature, the inexplicable flickering of lights, the faint, disembodied whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls of Ward C. He even experienced a few of these phenomena himself during his late-night rounds, a chill that would creep up his spine, a sense of being watched even when no one else was present. These experiences, coupled with Elara's unwavering conviction, began to chip away at Dr. Finch's scientific skepticism. He started to wonder if there was something more at play than mere mental illness, something beyond the realm of conventional medicine. He began to research local folklore, delving into the obscure history of the land upon which Blackwood Asylum stood. He discovered fragmented accounts of an ancient pre-Christian burial ground beneath the hill, a place where ritualistic sacrifices were once performed, a place said to be imbued with a malevolent energy. The timeline of Elara's stay at Blackwood Asylum became increasingly marked by these inexplicable occurrences. In January 1958, a nurse reported finding Elara levitating slightly above her bed, her eyes wide with terror, whispering frantically about the Watcher. The nurse, a pragmatic woman named Agnes Miller, who had worked at Blackwood for over 20 years, swore by her account. Despite the ridicule she faced from her colleagues, Agnes had seen many things in her time at the asylum. But this, she insisted, was different. She described the air in Elara's room as being thick with an unseen presence, a palpable weight that made it difficult to breathe. In March of that same year, several patients in Ward C began to exhibit similar symptoms to Elara's. They would speak of shadowy figures, of whispers, and of a pervasive cold. Some even claimed to see the Watcher themselves, a tall, gaunt figure with eyes that glowed with an unsettling red light. Mass hysteria was the official diagnosis, but Dr. Finch suspected something far more sinister. He believed that Elara's entity, the Watcher, was not confined to her alone, but was somehow spreading its influence throughout Ward C, perhaps even the entire asylum. Dr. Finch's growing conviction about the supernatural nature of Elara's case put him at odds with the asylum's administration, particularly Dr. Elias Thorne, the stern and traditional chief of staff. Dr. Thorne, a man of rigid scientific principles, dismissed Dr. Finch's theories as unprofessional speculation and unfounded sensationalism. He believed that Dr. Finch was allowing his imagination to run wild, jeopardizing the asylum's already fragile reputation. Dr. Thorne insisted on an increase in Elara's medication, believing that a stronger dose would quell her delusions and the subsequent hysteria among other patients. He threatened Dr. Finch with disciplinary action if he continued to pursue his unscientific investigations. Despite the pressure, Dr. Finch persisted. He felt a profound sense of responsibility towards Elara, a desperate need to understand what was happening to her, even if it meant risking his career. He saw her not as a patient to be managed, but as a victim, a vessel for something ancient and malevolent. The social context of the late 1950s played a significant role in how Elara's case, and indeed Blackwood Asylum itself, was perceived. Mental illness was still heavily stigmatized, often viewed as a moral failing rather than a medical condition. Institutions like Blackwood were often seen as necessary but regrettable places, where society's inconvenient truths could be hidden away. The idea of supernatural forces at play within such an institution was simply unthinkable to most, a dangerous distraction from the more pressing issues of underfunding and outdated practices. The general public, fed by sensationalized newspaper reports and a lack of accurate information, often viewed asylum patients with a mixture of fear and pity. This societal narrative made it incredibly difficult for anyone, even a professional like Dr. Finch, to propose an alternative explanation for the strange events at Blackwood without being dismissed as equally deranged. The prevailing scientific paradigm left little room for the unexplained, for the things that lurked in the shadows beyond the reach of reason. One of the key elements of Elara's case, and a chilling piece of verifiable fact, was the sudden and unexplained death of nurse Agnes Miller. On April 22, 1958, Agnes was found dead in Elara's room, her body slumped against the wall, her face frozen in a mask of terror. The official cause of death was attributed to a sudden cardiac arrest, but Dr. Finch harbored serious doubts. Agnes was a healthy woman, with no known history of heart conditions. Furthermore, the expression on her face, the wide, staring eyes, the contorted features, suggested something far more terrifying than a natural death. He noted the pervasive cold in the room, even more intense than usual, and a faint, acrid smell that seemed to cling to the air. Dr. Finch discreetly examined Agnes's body, noting a faint, almost imperceptible discoloration on her skin, a pattern of tiny, almost invisible marks that resembled ancient symbols he had seen in his research on the land's history. He kept this observation to himself, knowing that revealing it would only further alienate him from Dr. Thorne and the asylum administration. The death of Nurse Miller sent a ripple of fear through the asylum staff. Many nurses and orderlies, already unsettled by the strange occurrences, began to resign, unwilling to risk their own lives in a place they increasingly believed was cursed. The remaining staff became withdrawn, their faces etched with a profound weariness and a palpable sense of dread. Elara, meanwhile, seemed to deteriorate further. She became almost catatonic, her body racked by tremors, her whispers becoming more frequent and frantic. She would often scream in the dead of night, her cries echoing through the silent corridors of Ward C, a sound that chilled even the most hardened staff members to the bone. Dr. Finch, feeling a desperate urgency, intensified his research. He meticulously cross-referenced historical maps with the asylum's blueprints, trying to pinpoint the exact location of the ancient burial ground. He believed that the Watcher was an entity intrinsically linked to the land, an ancient malevolence disturbed by the asylum's construction, and that Elara was merely its most prominent victim, a conduit through which its power could manifest. In a desperate attempt to gather more evidence and perhaps find a solution, Dr. Finch began to secretly interview former patients and staff members who had since left Blackwood. He found a recurring pattern in their testimonies: tales of unexplained phenomena, of a pervasive sense of dread, and of a particular cold spot that seemed to move throughout the asylum. One former orderly, an elderly man named Thomas Albright, recounted a chilling experience from his time working in Ward C in the 1930s. He spoke of seeing shadowy figures at the foot of patients' beds, of hearing disembodied whispers, and of a constant feeling of being watched. He even claimed to have seen a patient, a young woman named Sarah, seemingly possessed by an unseen force, her voice changing to a guttural growl, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Thomas, traumatized by the experience, had resigned shortly after and never spoken of it again until Dr. Finch approached him. His testimony, though anecdotal, lent credence to Dr. Finch's growing suspicion that the Watcher was not a recent phenomenon, but a deeply rooted presence within Blackwood. Dr. Finch's investigation culminated in a chilling discovery. Through his research, he uncovered an obscure local legend, a tale passed down through generations of the indigenous population who once inhabited the land. The legend spoke of a malevolent spirit, a shadow weaver, that guarded the ancient burial ground, feeding on the despair and suffering of those who trespassed upon its sacred soil. It was said to be a shapeless entity, capable of manifesting as a cold presence, a whisper, or a terrifying apparitional figure. The legend also spoke of an ancient ritual, a way to appease the shadow weaver, involving offerings and a specific incantation. Dr. Finch, a man of science, found himself grappling with beliefs that defied all rational explanation. Yet, the consistency of the legend with Elara's accounts and the inexplicable events at Blackwood were too compelling to ignore. He began to believe that the Watcher was indeed the shadow weaver, and that Elara, through her profound despair, had inadvertently opened a gateway for its influence. The climax of this horrifying narrative occurred on the night of May 10, 1958. Dr. Finch, convinced that Elara was in grave danger, decided to take matters into his own hands. He had secretly acquired ancient texts and artifacts related to the Shadow Weaver legend, hoping to perform a cleansing ritual. He knew he was risking everything: his career, his reputation, and perhaps even his sanity. As he approached Elara's room in Ward C, the atmosphere grew heavy, the air thick with an almost palpable dread. The lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. A bone-chilling cold permeated the entire corridor, and the faint whispers, now louder and more distinct, seemed to emanate from every direction. He could hear Elara's frantic cries from within her room, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Upon entering Elara's room, Dr. Finch was met with a scene that would forever haunt his waking nightmares. Elara was no longer huddled in a corner. She was standing in the center of the room, her body rigid, her eyes wide and unnaturally bright. Her voice, when she spoke, was not her own. It was a deep, guttural growl, a voice that seemed to emanate from multiple sources at once, a chilling chorus of ancient malevolence. "You cannot stop it," the voice hissed. "It is here to stay. It feeds on despair. It feeds on fear. And it is hungry." The air crackled with an unseen energy, and objects in the room began to fly across the space, smashing against the walls with violent force. Dr. Finch, despite his terror, stood his ground. He clutched the ancient texts he had brought, his hands trembling, and began to recite the archaic incantation he had discovered. The words were difficult, guttural, and felt alien on his tongue. But he pressed on, his voice cutting through the cacophony of the entity's growls and the shattering of glass. As Dr. Finch chanted, the entity seemed to react with violent fury. Elara's body convulsed, and a dark, swirling shadow began to coalesce around her, growing larger, more defined, its form vaguely humanoid, but impossibly vast, its eyes burning with a malevolent red light. The Shadow Weaver was fully manifesting, its power unleashed. The temperature in the room plummeted further, and Dr. Finch could feel an icy grip tightening around his heart. He continued to chant, his voice growing stronger, imbued with a desperate resolve. He believed that the ritual, if completed correctly, would not destroy the entity, but merely banish it, sending it back to its ancient slumber beneath the earth. The struggle was agonizing. The entity fought back, lashing out with unseen tendrils of force, attempting to silence Dr. Finch, to break his will. But he held firm, his eyes fixed on the swirling shadow, his voice resonating with the power of the ancient words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the incantation reached its crescendo. A blinding flash of light erupted from Dr. Finch's hands, engulfing Elara and the monstrous shadow. A deafening roar filled the room, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and pain, as if something ancient and powerful was being ripped from its moorings. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The light faded, the roar subsided, and the room fell silent. The air, though still cold, no longer carried the oppressive weight of the entity's presence. Elara lay unconscious on the floor, her body limp, her face pale but devoid of the terror that had consumed it for so long. The Shadow Weaver was gone, banished, at least for now. Dr. Finch, exhausted and shaken, collapsed beside her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had succeeded, but at what cost? He knew that his actions would never be understood, never be believed by his colleagues or the outside world. He had witnessed something that defied all scientific explanation, something that would forever change his understanding of reality. The aftermath of that night was swift and severe. Dr. Finch was immediately dismissed from Blackwood Asylum. Dr. Thorne, furious at Dr. Finch's unauthorized actions and the chaotic scene discovered by the morning staff, accused him of gross negligence and mental instability. The official explanation for the damage in Elara's room was attributed to a severe psychotic episode on her part, exacerbated by Dr. Finch's unorthodox and irresponsible methods. The asylum, eager to avoid further scandal, quickly swept the entire incident under the rug. Elara Vance, miraculously, began to recover. Though still fragile and traumatized, the pervasive paranoia and the terrifying visions ceased. She was eventually discharged from Blackwood a few months later, a shadow of her former self, but free from the entity that had tormented her. Her parents, relieved to have their daughter back, though forever changed, never spoke of the true nature of her illness, attributing it to a nervous breakdown. Dr. Finch, his career in ruins, left the medical profession entirely. He spent the rest of his life in quiet solitude, meticulously documenting his experiences, trying to make sense of the inexplicable. He published several obscure articles under a pseudonym, hinting at the existence of forces beyond human comprehension. But they were largely dismissed as fictional tales. He never spoke publicly about his time at Blackwood, knowing that his story would be met with ridicule and disbelief. He died in 1985, his extraordinary experiences largely forgotten, his warnings unheeded. Blackwood Asylum, however, continued its slow descent into decay. The unexplained phenomena never truly ceased, though they diminished significantly after Elara's departure. The cold spots, the whispers, the feeling of being watched, these remained subtle reminders of the malevolent presence that had once been so powerful. The asylum finally closed its doors in 1968, deemed unsafe and unfit for human habitation. Its closure was attributed to financial difficulties and a lack of qualified staff, but many whispered that it was the pervasive darkness within its walls that truly drove it to its end. Today, Blackwood Asylum stands as a crumbling ruin, a testament to its dark history. Urban explorers and thrill-seekers occasionally venture within its decaying walls, drawn by the allure of its haunted reputation. They often report strange occurrences, sudden drops in temperature, disembodied whispers, and an overwhelming sense of dread. Some even claim to have seen shadowy figures lurking in the periphery of their vision, fleeting glimpses of something ancient and malevolent. The legend of the Watcher, or the Shadow Weaver, as Dr. Finch discovered, persists, woven into the fabric of local folklore, a chilling reminder of the entity that once terrorized the patients and staff of Blackwood. The story of Elara Vance and Dr. Alistair Finch serves as a stark reminder that some mysteries defy rational explanation, that some darknesses linger far beyond the reach of scientific understanding. The horrifying truth of Blackwood Asylum is not just a tale of mental illness and institutional neglect, but a chilling account of an ancient entity, a forgotten patient, and the enduring power of fear. It is a story that reminds us that some places are not just abandoned, but haunted, not by ghosts in the traditional sense, but by something far older, far more insidious, an entity that never truly left. The tale of Blackwood Asylum, Elara Vance, and Dr. Alistair Finch is a testament to the enduring power of the unknown, a chilling narrative that reminds us that some truths lie beyond the veil of our understanding. It's a story that compels us to question, to delve deeper into the shadows, and to acknowledge that the world holds mysteries far more profound and terrifying than we can imagine. If this journey into the dark heart of Blackwood Asylum has left you with a lingering chill, if the whispers of the Watcher still echo in your mind, then you understand the core of what we do here at Far Beyond Terror. We strive to bring you stories that challenge your perceptions, that provoke a sense of profound unease, and that stay with you long after the screen fades to black. We invite you to become a part of our community, to explore the darkest corners of human experience and the supernatural world alongside us. Don't just watch from the sidelines. Immerse yourself. Subscribe to Far Beyond Terror, hit that notification bell so you never miss another chilling tale, and share this story with those who dare to venture into the realm beyond fear. Your engagement helps us continue to uncover these forgotten truths, these narratives of dread that linger in the forgotten corners of our world. Join us again if you dare, as we continue our exploration of the truly terrifying. The Blackwood Asylum narrative, as unsettling as it is, merely scratches the surface of the phenomenon we call the Watcher. This entity, as Dr. Finch's increasingly frantic notes suggested, isn't a singular occurrence confined to a forgotten institution. Rather, it appears to be a manifestation, a localized echo of a far grander, more ancient dread that permeates the very fabric of certain places. These aren't just haunted locations. They are anchors, points where the veil between our reality and something else is dangerously thin. Consider the concept of residual haunting, a common trope in paranormal lore. It suggests that traumatic events can imprint themselves upon a location, replaying like a broken record. But the Watcher is different. It's not a passive echo. It's an active, malevolent presence that feeds, manipulates, and ultimately consumes. Elara Vance wasn't just a victim of a residual haunting. She was a conduit, a vessel whose profound trauma and vulnerability opened a door that should have remained sealed. Dr. Finch, with his unwavering scientific curiosity, inadvertently became a key, his attempts to rationalize the irrational only serving to strengthen the entity's hold. This isn't just about fear. It's about recognition. The Watcher doesn't just want to scare you, it wants to be acknowledged, understood, and ultimately welcomed. Its power lies in the slow erosion of your sanity, the insidious whispers that convince you of its reality, the subtle shifts in perception that make you question everything you once held true. It thrives on the isolation it creates, the way it systematically severs its victims from their support systems, leaving them adrift in a sea of their own terror. Let's delve deeper into the nature of these anchors. Think of places where inexplicable tragedies cluster, where a pervasive sense of unease hangs heavy in the air, regardless of the time of day or the people present. These aren't necessarily places of overt violence, but often locations of profound despair, prolonged suffering, or forgotten atrocities. The Blackwood Asylum, with its history of neglect, experimental treatments, and the unspoken suffering of its patients, was a fertile ground for such an entity. The sheer volume of concentrated emotional distress, the raw, unfiltered anguish, served as a beacon, a feast for something that preys on the fragile human psyche. One might argue that such phenomena are merely psychological, a product of suggestion and confirmation bias. Dr. Finch, a man of science, initially clung to this very explanation. His early notes are filled with clinical observations, attempts to diagnose Elara's delusions, to categorize her experiences within the framework of known mental illnesses. But as the entity's influence grew, as the impossible became undeniable, his scientific method began to unravel. This is the insidious genius of the Watcher. It doesn't just attack the mind, it attacks the very foundations of your understanding of reality. It forces you to confront the unsettling truth that there are forces at play that defy all logic, all reason. Consider the subtle ways the Watcher operates. It doesn't always manifest as a terrifying apparition, a spectral figure in the corner of your eye. Sometimes, it's the persistent feeling of being watched, even when you're alone. It's the inexplicable cold spot in a warm room, the faint, almost imperceptible whispers that seem to emanate from the walls themselves. It's the way objects subtly shift, the way shadows seem to deepen and stretch beyond their natural limit. These are not overt acts of aggression. They are psychological warfare, designed to slowly chip away at your sense of security, to make you doubt your own perceptions, to question your sanity. The tragic irony of Elara Vance's situation is that her very illness, her profound psychological distress, made her uniquely susceptible. Her mind, already fractured, became an open door. The entity didn't cause her illness, but it certainly exploited it, amplifying her fears, twisting her perceptions, and ultimately consuming her. Dr. Finch, in his earnest desire to help, inadvertently became a participant in her undoing, his scientific rigor slowly morphing into a desperate, futile struggle against an unseen enemy. The concept of the Watcher also forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that not all evil is born of human malice. There are forces that exist outside our understanding of good and evil, entities that simply are and whose interactions with humanity are purely predatory. They don't hate, they consume. They don't punish, they feed. This is a far more terrifying prospect than a vengeful ghost or a demonic possession, because it implies a universe far more indifferent and hostile than we care to imagine. Think of it as a parasitic relationship on a spiritual plane. The entity doesn't necessarily seek to destroy its host immediately. Instead, it seeks to cultivate, to nurture the conditions that allow it to thrive. In Elara's case, it was her overwhelming fear and isolation. In Dr. Finch's, it was his intellectual arrogance, his unwavering belief in the supremacy of reason, which made him an ideal target for a force that operates entirely outside of it. The more he tried to understand it, to categorize it, the more he opened himself up to its influence. This raises a crucial question. How do we protect ourselves from something that operates beyond our comprehension? The traditional methods of warding off evil, religious rituals, protective charms, are often based on specific belief systems. But the Watcher, being an ancient pre-human entity, likely predates such construct. Its power lies in its ability to exploit universal human vulnerabilities, fear, doubt, isolation, and the inherent human drive to seek patterns and meaning, even where none exist. Perhaps the greatest defense lies not in ritual, but in connection. The entity thrives on isolation, on severing its victims from the reassuring anchor of human interaction. The moment Elara was left alone in the asylum, cut off from the outside world, she became a prime target. Dr. Finch, in his obsessive pursuit of understanding, also isolated himself, retreating into his research, pushing away colleagues and friends who might have offered a different perspective, a grounding presence. The enduring legacy of Blackwood Asylum, then, isn't just a grim tale of a forgotten place. It's a cautionary one. It warns us against the dangers of intellectual hubris, the perils of dismissing the unknown, and the profound vulnerability of the human mind when confronted with forces it cannot comprehend. It suggests that some knowledge is best left undisturbed, some doors best left locked, and some questions best left unanswered. The Watcher concept also resonates with ancient folklore and mythological archetypes across various cultures. Many ancient civilizations had tales of unseen entities, primal forces that predated humanity, lurking in the shadows, influencing events, and occasionally manifesting in terrifying ways. These weren't always gods or demons in the traditional sense, but often amorphous, shadowy beings that existed on the fringes of reality, feeding on human emotion or simply observing, their motives inscrutable. The Blackwood entity could be a localized manifestation, a particularly strong nexus point for one such ancient force. Consider the geological aspects of such locations. Are there specific ley lines, energy conduits, or even unusual mineral deposits that could amplify these phenomena? While Dr. Finch's notes didn't delve into geophysics, it's a fascinating avenue for further exploration. The idea that certain geographical locations inherently possess a predisposition for attracting such entities adds another layer of dread. It suggests that these anchors aren't random. They are chosen, perhaps even built upon, for reasons we have yet to discern. The story of Elara Vance and Dr. Alistair Finch also highlights the ethical dilemmas inherent in investigating such phenomena. At what point does scientific inquiry cross into reckless endangerment? When does the pursuit of knowledge become an act of profound irresponsibility? Dr. Finch, in his pursuit of truth, inadvertently unleashed a horror that consumed not only his patient, but ultimately him. His descent into madness wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a testament to the destructive power of the entity he sought to understand. His final, fragmented notes, scrawled in a hand that barely resembled his own, are a chilling testament to this. They speak not of scientific breakthroughs, but of profound terror, of the complete erosion of his rational mind. He ceased to be a scientist and became merely another victim, another voice in the chorus of fear that the Watcher had cultivated within the asylum wall. The Blackwood Asylum, therefore, is not just a building. It is a monument to a profound oversight, a place where humanity's attempts to categorize and control the unknown utterly failed. It stands as a silent sentinel, a stark reminder that our understanding of the universe is inherently limited, and that there are forces at play that operate on a scale and with an intent that we can barely begin to fathom. The tale of the Watcher is a narrative that refuses to be neatly categorized. It blurs the lines between psychological horror and supernatural dread, between scientific investigation and existential terror. It leaves us with more questions than answers, and that, perhaps, is its most unsettling aspect. Because the unknown, the truly unknowable, is often far more terrifying than any defined monster. So, as we bring our exploration of Blackwood Asylum and the entity known as the Watcher to a close, remember this. The stories we share at Far Beyond Terror are not just tales. They are glimpses into the darker corners of existence. They are warnings, whispers from the abyss, urging us to remain vigilant, to question our assumptions, and to acknowledge that there are forces in this world that defy all explanation. The lingering chill you feel, the unease that settles in your gut, that is the echo of the Watcher. It is the subtle reminder that some places are not just abandoned but cursed. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, and some entities once disturbed never truly leave. Join us next time, if you dare, as we continue our journey into the truly terrifying. Because the world is vast, and the shadows are deep, and there are countless untold horrors waiting to be unearthed. And remember, subscribe to Far Beyond Terror, hit that notification bell, and share these tales. Your engagement helps us to continue bringing these forgotten truths to light, even if those truths plunge us deeper into the heart of darkness. For in understanding these narratives of dread, perhaps, just perhaps, we can better understand the delicate balance of our own reality and the terrifying forces that lie just beyond its fragile edge. The journey into the unknown is a perilous one, but it is a journey we must take, for in the shadows, sometimes, we find the most profound truths. And sometimes those truths are far more terrifying than we could ever imagine. The whispers from the abyss, as we call them, are not merely figments of folklore or campfire tales designed to elicit a cheap thrill. They are echoes of genuine encounters, fragments of experiences that shatter the comfortable illusion of a predictable world. Consider the case of the Whispering Pines incident, a series of disappearances in a secluded national park that defy all conventional explanation. For decades, hikers vanished without a trace, leaving behind only an unsettling silence and the occasional inexplicable humming reported by those who dared to venture too deep into its ancient forest. Authorities attributed it to rogue wildlife, treacherous terrain, even cult activity. But no bodies were ever recovered, no definitive evidence ever found. Locals, however, spoke of a presence, something that didn't hunt in the traditional sense, but absorbed. They described a palpable drain on their energy, a feeling of being watched not by eyes, but by an absence, a void that seemed to pull at the very fabric of their being. While the Watcher of Blackwood Asylum manifested as a malevolent observer, the entity in Whispering Pines was a more insidious predator, an existential vacuum that consumed not just the physical, but the spiritual essence of its victim. These are the narratives we seek to unearth at Far Beyond Terror. Not just ghost stories, but accounts that challenge our understanding of reality, that force us to confront the limitations of our scientific framework. How do you quantify an absence? How do you map a void? These are not questions easily answered by empirical data, yet the chilling testimonies of survivors and the unexplained phenomena persist. We delve into the psychological toll these encounters take, exploring the post-traumatic stress, the profound shifts in worldview that accompany a brush with the truly unknowable. Victims often report a persistent sense of being unmoored, as if the world they once knew has become a fragile facade, beneath which lurks a terrifying, indifferent truth. Their very perception of time and space can become warped, their memories fragmented, their sense of self eroded. This isn't merely fear, it's a fundamental disruption of identity. Our exploration extends beyond isolated incidents, too. We examine patterns, recurring motifs across disparate cultures and centuries that suggest a deeper, more interconnected tapestry of dread. The concept of the liminal space, for example, those transitional areas like abandoned hospitals, forgotten highways, or the eerie quiet of a deserted shopping mall at night, has consistently been linked to supernatural occurrence. These are places betwixt and between, where the veil between worlds is said to thin, where the rules of our reality bend and sometimes break. Is it the architecture itself, the residual energy of countless human experiences, or are these locations simply more susceptible to the incursions of entities that exist just beyond our perception? The answer, as always, remains elusive, but the consistent reports of anomalous activity in such spaces cannot be ignored. Consider the unsettling phenomenon of shadow people, dark, humanoid figures witnessed in peripheral vision, often accompanied by a sense of dread or paralysis. Are these hallucinations, sleep paralysis demons, or something far more profound? The sheer volume and consistency of these accounts, transcending cultural and geographical boundaries, suggest a shared experience that goes beyond individual psychology. Are they interdimensional travelers, lingering echoes of past tragedies, or perhaps even a primitive pre-human intelligence that has always coexisted with us, unseen, unheard, but occasionally glimpsed in the fleeting darkness? The deeper we plunge into these narratives, the more we realize that the true terror lies not in the monstrous, but in the mundane, twisted into the monstrous. It's the familiar made alien, the safe rendered parallel. It's the realization that the world we inhabit is not as solid, as rational as we've been led to believe. The very air we breathe, the ground beneath our feet, may be permeated by forces that defy our comprehension. Forces that operate on principles entirely alien to our own. This isn't just about jump scares or gore. It's about the erosion of certainty, the dismantling of everything we hold dear about our ordered universe. As we move towards the conclusion of this particular season of Far Beyond Terror, we want to leave you with a lingering question. What if the monsters aren't just in the shadows, but in the very fabric of reality itself? What if our perception, our consciousness, is merely a filter, designed to protect us from a truth too vast, too terrifying, to fully comprehend? The stories we bring to light are not just about the entities themselves, but about the human capacity for resilience, for madness, and for the desperate search for meaning in the face of overwhelming horror. So, as the final echoes of The Watcher and the whispers from the abyss begin to fade, remember to keep your mind open, your senses sharp, and your skepticism balanced with a healthy dose of awe. For the journey into the unknown is far from over. There are countless more tales to tell, countless more truths waiting to be uncovered, and countless more horrors lurking just beyond the edge of our understanding. The shadows are indeed deep, and in their depths, perhaps, we will finally find what we are truly looking for, even if what we find changes us forever. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never forget that sometimes the most terrifying truths are the ones we ourselves unknowingly invite into our lives.